Hey everyone, it's Adam Tracy, and the question today is DeFi gambling. And I want to differentiate from DeFi gaming, right? Which I can talk about in a subsequent entry, but DeFi gambling, which are decentralized, smart driven contract platforms for games of chance and the regulations surrounding that, right? And there's a lot of them out there, almost like half, and don't quote me, but almost half of like the on-chain value is locked in gambling or gaming in some way in DeFi, in the DeFi landscape. And the question becomes, do you need a license, right? And so you go back to, the ongoing saga of like being a decentralized organization, whether you're a DAO, LLC, or just like an unincorporated DAO, which I've talked about before, and whether being driven by smart contract exonerates you or exempts you from having to get a license, right? And over 80 countries regulate online gaming in some way, most through licensing. And then you have protective laws like the Unlawful Internet Gaming Act in the United States, which directly prohibits, and in fact makes it a crime for a offshore unlicensed casino or sportsbook to solicit and accept payments from U.S. persons. So it comes with great risk to kind of run these things. And like the argument always seems to be, well, since it's smart contract driven, there can be no intent, right? And if you talk about like any law, even speeding, like you have elements that make up the offense, and intent or knowledge is always one of them, right? And like I've said before, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for anything decentralized to start decentralized, right? Like there's an idea, there's a guy, maybe there's a few guys, maybe there's more than that. But like to get true decentralization is very hard to really make something work, in the sense that there has to be somebody or some like close group that can control the project to get the project off the ground, right? It's like the too many chefs scenario. So I look at it and I say, well, I don't know how you can really like make that argument, and then arguments starting to get knocked down in different contexts, especially like in like the DEX or like token offering context, like vis-a-vis securities laws, and hasn't really been seen in the gambling context. But the stakes are so much higher because, like, especially in the US, there's like criminal penalties associated with being an unlicensed operator. And so while I get the rationale, I don't know if it's actually enough to pass muster. And then there's also like the civil liability thing. And you've had court cases where an unincorporated DAO, like an association which takes form of like a general partnership under state law, the court decisions have been that any member of that DAO is joint and severally liable for the operations of the DAO as a whole, right? So like you could be this modicum small investor who had nothing to do with the startup or anything, just you bought a couple tokens and you're part of the DAO, but you could be held liable for all of the liability of the DAO, right? So there's a lot of risk inherent in that, and that's why obviously either paying the $100 in Wyoming to incorporate as an LLC DAO, or doing a DAO in Marshall Islands or BVI, wherever it is like paramount, right? For just the protection of the people who are going to come in as members. So, as I view it, right, and as I think like the court cases are sort of like trending, I don't see how you don't, or how you can exist in a truly decentralized environment and not need a gaming license of some type, right? And even so, you're probably not going to get online gaming licenses, of which there's not a lot of states that offer it, being some sort of like crypto based. The law just isn't there, right? You could go offshore where the licenses are also considerably cheaper. They don't require like a partnership with a major, gaming operation like, some of the larger states do in New York, Illinois, etc. And, but you run into the same problem. Like a license in Curacao doesn't entitle you to, operate in the United States and so on and so forth. So I think if you're like in the gambling space in, DeFi, like there's no real way to geofence or block US persons because you're probably not doing AML to begin with, which is part of the problem and part of the problem where I think is going to drive a lot of, regulation or enforcement, as it were. But like, it just doesn't go that far, So I think you're driven to like an Isle of Man, Curacao, Costa Rica, wherever, and you're still going to be somewhat limited in terms of, where you can operate from legally. So DeFi gaming, and like metaverse gaming, which is a whole nother thing. I just see the necessity for a license, like if only out of abundance of caution. Like if you're on some little island somewhere and you never plan to leave, I suppose you could do it. But, I just don't see how people can make the argument rationally, like in court, right? Like, it's one thing that people who are heavily invested in crypto and things like that could argue the nature of like decentralization and DAOs, but until the law, like, metamorphosizes and like comes up with something a little more clear, you're probably better off getting that license. So if you have any questions, definitely hit me up, Adam at adamtracy.io, and I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.